So, on a discourse site that I frequent, I recently started a topic entitled, Does EvoPsych Explain the Violence of Yahweh? For those of you who don't know, EvoPsych is short for evolutionary psychology. And essentially, it pairs like modern research into the psychology of humans with the study of primate behavior. So like it will compare modern primates, other modern primates such as chimpanzees, bonobos, baboons, etc., with humans who are also viewed as primates, by most scientists now. And it also tries to extrapolate back into our evolutionary history and speculate about what kind of selective pressures led to the psychology we see now. That's like a really, it's probably an oversimplification of evolutionary psychology, but that's my understanding of its goals and purposes. And for me, I'm reading this book called Alpha God by Hector Garcia, who is a licensed psychiatrist. Um, it's very well researched. He's done a lot of study on this topic, cites quite a few references from respected scientists, two of which I have also read books by. One is Pascal Boyer. Been reading his book, Religion Explained is the title of it. And it's essentially attempting to develop a cognitive science of religion. And, he brings evolution into it as well from that perspective, but it's more focused on the cognitive science of religion, so like studying our brains and thinking about, why does religion develop? Like if religion is a natural phenomenon, what is it about human minds that causes it to manifest? Why do we create religions? Why do we create gods? This is part of an ongoing study for me dating back well over a year, when I can't pinpoint the specific time when this realization hit me, but just the simple thought is this: what if, rather than be created in God's image, as Christianity taught me, we created the gods, including Yahweh, in our image? What if we are projecting our own psychology onto the mind of God and the gods that we create in our myths and our legends and our religions? So that's a simple question, but not, especially for someone who's been a Christian his entire life, not an easy one to answer. It's not an easy question to answer intellectually. There's a lot of study that's involved. I mean, it's taken me months and months and months studying, listening to lectures from scientists from multiple disciplines, obviously studying the Bible itself and thinking about it, examining it, coming at it from several different angles. And what I found a general emotional resistance within myself to believing that I'm just a primate, that I'm just another animal, albeit one of the dominant mammals on the planet. I think it's hard to argue with the perspective that humans have become the dominant mammal on this planet, due in no small part to two factors: one, our ability to cooperate, and number two, our ability to make tools, weapons, being one of the most powerful tools we have created, agriculture being another. We have definitely reshaped the planet as we have immigrated from Africa. Most biologists I've heard from in recent months speculate that we were primates that lived in Africa and that we immigrated out of Africa. And apparently there's ways they can verify this. They study things like the development of language and culture. And I guess there are ways you can tell, or at least see clues that point to this theory, the theory that we all immigrated out of Africa, that we were primates who lived in Africa, and that we immigrated out of Africa and evolved over time. Ironically, and I probably would have had the same thought myself. I don't know that I would have ever said it to someone directly, but ironically, Christians accuse evolutionists and humanists of being arrogant, of exalting themselves. What I'm slowly realizing is that the opposite is true to a large extent. That Christianity specifically exalts humans to like a ridiculously high status. It makes us the second most important beings in the universe, second only to God himself, arguably even more important than the angels and the seraphim, because we have souls and we are adopted by God, and can have a relationship with God. We experience redemption, according to Christian theology, which is something angels don't experience. So even though we don't have quite the same physical proximity to the fullness of God's presence, for lack of a better term, we have the Spirit of God, for Christians, have the Spirit of God ostensibly living literally inside of us. We are like his temple. So they're given a very exalted status, Jesus being the apex of that, obviously, like the meeting point between Yahweh and man. So contrast that with coming to terms with an evolutionary perspective on humanity. We are diminished, actually, to the rank of just a highly evolved primate, and I think our culture, our ability to transmit culture, our mental capacity for remembering the past and making predictions about the future, we have more ability to do those things than even the most evolved primates, such as chimpanzees or bonobos or apes. They show some limited abilities for these, from what we have observed. Like, they show some capacity for remembering, for projecting into the future, predicting, and by that I mean like cognitively doing these things. Like, it's a little different than instincts, that genetic instincts, if you will, that you're born with. I'm talking about having the cognitive ability to remember the past and think about it, to recall it, to think about it, and then to make predictions based upon it. It seems that Homo sapiens have a higher capacity for that. And obviously we have far, far advanced skills in tool making and culture making and the ability to transmit culture and learning. So those are reasons why, if you're just looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, those are reasons why we are now the dominant primates on the planet and the dominant mammals on the planet. And I think even if you want to look at that from a Christian perspective, where that's like our divine right and we were designed to be the dominant, regardless, you can observe it in the natural world. So I think what's more likely is that a religion was created that reinforced the status that already existed, and of course the people who wrote that claimed that their God is the one who imbued that status upon humans. This right to have dominion over the planet. And that gets extended even further when you get to the New Testament, and it talks about one day, I believe it's Romans 8, if I'm remembering my references correctly, where the Apostle Paul talks about the belief that we will one day reign over the entire universe. We will reign with Jesus. We will be co-rulers or co-regents with Jesus, and we will rule over the entire universe. So it expanded. It's like you talk about exalting humanity above every other animal and every other created being. Christianity does that, absolutely does that. So if that isn't literally true, if God isn't literally doing that, if we don't genuinely have that status intrinsically or such that it's been imbued by God, then that's like the height of arrogance. Like, you want to talk about arrogance, Now, I don't, that's just intellectually speaking. I don't think most people's, I think the reasons we're attracted to that idea are more complex than a simple desire to be the most important beings in the universe or to be the dominant beings. I think it's more complicated than that. I think it also relates very closely to our desire to be loved and cared for by a parent figure. God is portrayed as a father, and traditionally, historically, and this is borne out, by evolutionary science as well, from what I understand, and the book Alpha God talks a lot about this, that historically males, even amongst hunter-gatherer groups, powerful males, dominant males have been seen as protectors, as providers. Even today, in studies done across multiple cultures of humans, like human females, statistically prefer men who have greater power, greater rank, or greater resources, or all three. Statistically they are more attracted to them as mates. I've heard things like that for years, and apparently science is bearing this out, and they've done multicultural studies that reinforce that tendency. Doesn't mean every woman is like that, but the aggregate of women surveyed demonstrates the reality that women are more attracted to men who are taller than them, stronger, physically larger than them. So the implication there is that you have the ability to protect them from other males who may be a threat to them or to your offspring. And that's certainly borne out in human culture as well. Like, that's an idea that's reinforced, and it's fairly normative. Now, that's with the advent of weapons and tools, as well as in more recent decades, the increase in women's desire to learn how to fight themselves and protect themselves. You see that shifting. But historically, it's, and to some extent, this is one of the reasons why you see the biological difference, according to Hector Garcia and the researchers that he cites. Like, however this trend started, stronger, more dominant males were able to physically defeat rivals for female attention, for sexual access to women, and as such, like their descendants are the ones, they had more descendants, who then inherited many of their dominant male characteristics, so just over time, women kept selecting either by choice or by force, or it was selected for them because these men defeated the other rivals and kind of forced the women into either way. Like you see both going on, both traits, both tendencies. See that continue. And kind of the main point of the current chapter I'm reading in Alpha God is that this is, if you genuinely had an omnipotent, omniscient, transcendent God, you shouldn't see this God acting like a male primate, where you see sexual jealousy, you see fights over territory, you see a preference for virgins, so that you can, obviously human males and male primates prefer virgin females because that ensures that gives you greater assurance that the offspring your woman has, are your own and not some competitor, so that's a pretty good explanation for why virgins are approved. And you see that all over the Bible, and Hector Garcia points out, I think quite accurately, that you see this same preference from the Christian God, from Yahweh, even from Jesus, who both Yahweh and Jesus, as it's depicted in the Bible, they talk about, Yahweh talks about Israel refers to Israel as his wife, his bride. Jesus also, refers to, I don't even say that Jesus does, but Jesus' followers taught that Jesus looks at the church as his bride. So you see terms that are connected to sexual jealousy, mate guarding. You see this in the Old Testament and really in a lot of ways in the New Testament as well. The ultimate sin is not cruelty to other humans. Like, these are not the worst sins. The worst sins is unfaithfulness, infidelity to your divine lover, essentially. Worshipping any other god. So, if we're seen as God's bride, if we have sex with any other male deity, this is metaphorically speaking, of course, that is the worst sin. And you certainly see this sentiment throughout the Old Testament a lot. You see it in the Shema, you see it in the Ten Commandments. I mean, the beginning of the Ten Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. Hector Garcia points out once again, I'm forced to admit, it seems to be an accurate assessment. This is male primate behavior. This is dominant male hierarchy on display. You're mate guarding. You're saying, don't you dare go have sex with any other male god, my bride Israel, because if you do, you're a dirty whore, you're a prostitute, and I will physically punish you for doing so. And you see that kind of language pop up frequently in the Old Testament. And you see it most glaringly in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Jesus makes a few hints of it in the Gospels, but the book of Revelation is the most obvious depiction of this same type of sentiment. So it's just, it's this book, and it's uncomfortable, frankly. It's hard for me to come to grips with this, but this book is further reinforcing the hypothesis that I have been testing for the last year and a half. Does this book make more sense as the creation of human minds, and specifically male human minds? Does it make more sense viewing it that way than it does the inspired word of a genuinely transcendent, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent being? And I think the answer is yes, and every time I go back and test it, I continue to see that the answer is yes. It makes more sense. Logically, the evidence fits that hypothesis more than the hypothesis that this is the infallible, inspired word of a transcendent, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent deity. I think if such a being does actually exist and decided to write a scripture, it would be a lot different than this, and it would be manifestly better, I guess, but definitely different. It's different. You wouldn't expect it to look like something a human man, specifically a human man, made up. You wouldn't expect it to appear to be designed by human men in order to consolidate their own power over other men as well as over women. But that is what you see over and over again in the Old Testament and in the New Testament as well.